come from? What do I do here? I don't know where to begin. I was born in London. I'm a Londoner. I grew up in South London, but I've moved a long way to North London, which is like another country. But I occasionally go and visit my mother in South London from time to time. I was educated in London, in South London. I went to do an undergraduate degree in history, actually. Initially, actually, to do art. I was going to do art, and then I switched into doing an academic subject, history, at Lancaster University. And then I worked in the civil service for a while. I actually worked as a film editor for a period. I even worked in the city, in trade insurance for a while. And then I went off to Africa, and I lived in Africa for 4 years. I taught in schools and at the university, travelled around, lived with groups of people, started to do anthropology before I'd done any training in anthropology. I lived for many months actually amongst pastoralists. It always made me put my clothes back on. They didn't really like to see me walking around naked. But so I did that when I was a young man, and then I lived in villages along the border with Uganda. And then I came back to the UK and I did a master's degree in economics, something that some of my colleagues would find rather surprising these days. And then I decided that I wanted to go and do a PhD in anthropology, so I went back to the border region between Uganda and Sudan, and I researched there for several years and wrote a PhD on that area, and then began to specialise ever more on conflict-related areas in that part of the world originally. And then, what happened then? Then I got a job at the Open University, and I started to write distance learning courses for the Open University, and building on some of the training I'd had before I'd gone off to Africa, I began to get involved in the media and started to make radio programmes. I used to do a radio series on BBC Radio about the developing world, and I wrote a lot of distance learning materials about international development. I was involved in setting up the first development management courses at the Open University and then later at the LSE. What else to tell you? I've started to work on other things, on poverty and development issues, on media, on ethnic violence in different places, and increasingly on tropical diseases. I worked on HIV/AIDS some years ago, or more recently on the so-called neglected tropical diseases, mostly parasitic infections, and I've had funding since 2005, mainly from the Gates Foundation and also other donors too, looking in detail at what happens on the ground when massive vertically run disease control programs potentially transform people's lives or often have very little effect, but then to understand why they have very little effect. I'm working particularly on schistosomiasis, which some people call bilharzia, and with elephantiasis, lymphatic filariasis in Tanzania and Uganda. And then my other big research program is on justice and security. I have a big grant that has come from the Department for International Development to set up a centre for the study of security and justice, looking at the effects of programs on the purported end users of those sort of activities, whether it's transitional justice programming or providing policing and so on, to see whether or not it actually has any effect, mostly in Central Africa. Well, I'm happy to talk to students about almost everything. I've taught most courses in the department at various points. I used to teach DV400, I used to teach the Development Management Core course, I've taught African Development, the Health course, Complex Emergencies, the Humanitarian course. And yeah, I'm interested in almost all things I would imagine that students are interested in. I've been a bit disappointed this year. I haven't had many takers for my office hours. I kind of sit here thinking somebody might come and talk to me, but they don't. Maybe that's because I'm not actually doing much cold-faced teaching, and but you know, some people come and talk to me about their dissertations. So I'm happy to talk to students about almost anything, really. Spot on campus. I don't think I have an answer to that. Well, I quite like my room, I suppose. I think the bit of campus I like best actually is where it opens onto Lincoln's Inn Fields, and I kind of feel like there's a bit of green space we can look at rather than a areas of concrete and traffic and roads. I like the idea of maybe somehow making Lincoln's Inn Fields, you know, the LSE's garden. It would be nice if we could, maybe we could buy it. You asked me what book I'm reading now. I mean, I spend a lot of my time not reading anything about international development, I'm afraid. I have a real interest in music, so I'm reading music books. I've been reading a book about Mahler recently, and a book about music in the 20th century. So I spend quite a lot of time reading about music. Who would I like to be with amongst the Destin, well, it's not called Destin anymore, I shouldn't say Destin, should I? The International Development Department staff. If I was stuck on an island, marooned on an island, well, I guess some answers to that question might be rather compromising, but I think probably the practical answer would be somebody who could put up a bivouac and protect me from, you know, attacks of sort of violent locals, and I think probably I'd go for Stuart Gordon rather than someone like Diana. And, you know, David knows a lot about those sorts of things, David Keane, but I don't think he would be very good with a machete. My favourite thing to do in London, well, my family live in London, so I suppose it would be, my wife wouldn't be happy if I didn't say be with my family. But if I'm not being with my family and my children and so on, I suppose the thing I really like doing, that my children complain about me going off and doing in the evening sometimes, is going to concerts. I go to concerts a lot. I go to at least one a week, sometimes two, and I go to a lot of opera and ballet and a lot of theatre. So I love London because there's just so much going on, from, you know, the best of the world of opera to fantastic jazz, and I just love that part of London. Seize the day.